For my eyelashes, that's the natural color. There was some in there, but over the last 3-4 years, it's really started to get gray. I mean, way too much gray. I couldn't believe it. Probably all the hours. Well, Christ, I've been working. The average is like 14, 15 hours a day, 6 days a week.
Really?
You know, banging out those F-18s, banging out those F-15s, banging out the F-16s.
You work on a full fighter? You have the whole plane there?
Nah, just the cockpit part of it. All the control instruments, display units, readouts, everything in the flight deck part of it that the pilot would use. Any of the controls. That's
What's
all
your
ours.
specialty?
Just a project engineer.
Project engineer?
Yeah,
Switches?
if you have to get into a specialty, it's night vision. You know, out of all that stuff, the hardest part of the work is conversion over for night vision, or you know, the old goggles, as they say. It's not really all that hard. It's just a matter of converting the panels into a different lighting, and it's a greenish color. I mean, you might have a panel that's lighting up white light, but now you need the color to be green, and the infrared energy has to be at a real low, minimal detection level, because that's the trick nowadays. Is we're looking for, you know, IR leaks coming out of that airplane all over the place. You know, they want the cockpit. They don't want the tailpipe. They want to go for the gusto. Yeah, that's the same old story. It sometimes sounds easy, but when you start doing all these conversions, the instruments, all the flight hardware, oh my God, the things you get into are just incredible. It's just not as easy.
It's not as easy as what?
It's not as easy as just taking the same lighting systems that are already there and taking them out and putting in a green one. It don't work that way.
Oh.
You know, the filtering systems are bigger. You've got wedges and weird things in some of the instruments for, you know, viewing angles that are all taken out of a very specially ground and polished glass. And now you're getting there and you're attacking the old lighting system and modifying it over to be compatible for ANVIS. And it's not that easy. It's a big chore. And everything that goes along with it, the ejection systems, the push-button type panels, the switches. If you design the panel, if it's a push-button panel or what they call a keyboard, you know, you have to do the whole thing, you know, all the way through. The circuitry matrix, everything else that's in there. And that's just one panel and maybe, 150 different pieces of flight hardware. Yeah, we just did a big one for McDonnell Douglas here last year, when they converted over all the F-18, the F-18E, all that stuff converted over for NVG or ANVIS. As they say, ANVIS Green A, right out of the mil spec.
Right, let me ask you a couple questions related to the story. In your opinion, who's the host?
Who's the host?
Yeah.
Jesus Christ. A little short guy we found out in the desert in the Nazca Plains. No, or was it Tuer Muerto? I believe the thing with the host was to do something about the original cloning, the original first, way back when. Somehow, golly, you know, I'm trying to remember just from questions that I would ask, you know. And because these are like, you get pictures and not so much words. Somewhere in this, when they got into the science of being able to reduplicate themselves, they started it and then they sort of abandoned it all in the same breath. Now, I don't know what kind of time we're talking here. You know, a couple hundred years, 1,000 years, I don't know. They didn't go along with it too far. Because I guess the inevitable is, as you get farther and farther and farther away from all this stuff, depending upon where your environments may go, you could wind up doing yourself more harm than good. Now somehow this one fellow, like we've talked about Voltaire, I mean, each of these people had a position or a role they would play, like a mayor or a police chief. I do believe the first cell, the original host cell in the first cloning, came from, and I don't even know who this original first fellow was. I just cannot remember anymore. But it was something to do with that, and that started this whole entire colony or civilization that was merged with the pre-Incas way back when. I gather genetically you're taking a piece of them and somehow doing something with a piece of, you know,
Mm-hmm.
Voltaire's group, and a couple pieces of this, that, and everything else all thrown together. Remember the stuff we saw on the rocks about like mama, dada, and here comes all the babies, and in between was the little, like the space guy or something in between all this?
Uh-huh.
You know, you know, it's so hard to remember all this because, you know, at one time, a lot of this was right up here on the top of my head. Nowadays it's so far removed, I don't even know. I'm not sure if this same host is the same host that was there as a part of what went on in Toro Muerto, or if indeed he was the father of the technology. Because somewhere along the way, remember when they left the planet because their planet was dying out and they went out to find homes elsewhere?
Uh-huh.
The only way to survive was to go through this cloning process.
Right.
And something in all that fell backwards to the original secrets, if you will, or whatever processes were used in this. So they had the technology, and they had the need to use it, if you will. So then it was a matter of going back to the old records, I guess these little gold or goldish discs or whatever they were, and recapture all that knowledge, re-implant it back into their brain in such a way that they could use it and know what to do. And then that would go along with them, you know, for each generation thereon. But how it ties into Toro Muerto, I'm not really too sure. Unless it was just that, if it was some kind of genetic splicing that they were doing between their civilization and the pre-Incas, then that part's kind of wacko, because I know they always said they really didn't take any direct involvement, and that would be taking a direct involvement. This may have been more on an experimental level, and no actual life forms were created.
Now, one thing they said about you was you were the keeper of the Kipu.
That's nice.
You
I still remember what it is. I remember what it is, but I don't remember what you do with this widget. Let's see. I remember this to be a God. Let's say it's an ancient computer system, if you will, right? And that you could store bits and pieces of data, information that you could then recall at a future date.
Right.
Well, it's sort of that idea, except this was done with cords and ropes that were tied and knotted in a special way that had meaning. It was like telling a story. It was like, in other words, you could read a book through these knots and ropes and cords by the, you know, the mere reading or touching and seeing of how many there were in a set pattern. And then there would be a whole story involved with all this. And I guess what was happening is the stories were passed on, and then somewhere along the way, of course that died out, whatever it was. Going back way before all that started in South America, very similar to that was a tool that the Voltaire's people had used, a similar thing like that. Not rope though, or reed that they used to fashion. This was different. This was something that was done with more like metal fibers with cords and knots. A little different. I remember it's one of those pictures again. I can remember seeing pictures where you had X knots, like maybe you had 44 strands of knots going across, or 44 cords going across, and there'd be so many knots spaced so much apart on each cord, right? And then if the bottoms were anchored in such a way, you could strike the chords like you would for musical notes. And because of the different kind of knots on there, you got different type of sound effects that somehow would pitch out. And all this was again the same way of having a language or the written word, like reading a book. But you know, like what do you want to call this? Like Spaceman Braille? You know, that'd be like Spaceman Braille. Now somewhere along the way, they did get some of this knowledge to the pre-Incas. And they apparently did go on to do something with that. They went on to do a lot of things with what they had showed them. Viracocha, right? All that. I mean, like one day the guy's inspired, he goes off, he does this. He finds a few followers, and pretty soon before you know it, you got a whole entire civilization leading towards what then was supposed to be an ultimate end, which was to die. You know, to lay their lives down for the sake of peace, because they wouldn't use weapons to defend themselves when they were attacked by the Spanish, right? I think all that still goes along with their story, that even going back, way back then, this whole thing about their race eventually dying out, they couldn't just keep on going on. They may have been reenacting a lot of what would happen in the future with Voltaire's people, which is what? It's not that far away now, 2011. Yeah.
That's right.
Qumran, I guess if you had to be someplace, Qumran would be where to be. And that would be what, June? Is it June or December? You know, I don't even remember if it was June or December.
December 22nd, December 24th at 8 p.m.
Well, you get better memory than I do. I'm glad you take notes on these things. Well, what, half of this came out, what, while I was in Bye-Bye Land, kind of tranced out here?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, that's what's hard, because, you know, all the things that came out through the other side, the subconscious side, or trans medium side, or whatever you want to call it, it is so hard now to go back and touch those things. You know, I just can't do it. You know, occasionally things come up. You know, Marla and I will talk about this or that, and the wife asks the question, and or I'll ask her one. We'll both sit there and scratch our heads and go, "Gee, I can't remember." You know, maybe it's maybe it's supposed to be that way, because remember, that's the plan.
Yeah.
You know, eventually to do what you could do, and then just let me go. You know, go on back, take what you got, go back and just live a productive, normal life. You know, it's nice to know that something came out of the Nor, though. I mean, that was a very nice gift, and well, that was the whole idea. Remember the idea in this was to be able to create the gift, to be able to give it away, to be able to know that it did do good, that it did help children, that it did help adults, that it did something to help humanity in some way. You know, to say that would be the mind star of all mankind would be kind of stretching it a bit, because we're back to this being a peanut, right? But the idea was to do it and do all this from your heart, all the labor, all the work that went into it, and be able to give it away, walk away, and forget it, that it never existed. That's kind of like going out and buying a $300,000 home and giving it away.
Yeah.
You know, that's, you know,
So
that's
how did you
not
feel
really
about
not really the same comparison, but you know,
Well,
I would have to admit this has more get up and go than that.
How do you feel about that? About everything that you did? Do you feel like this time was wasted, or what did you learn from it?
No, because, you know, the working with the Nor was direct. I mean, that was physical as well as mental. You know, the plans and the drawings and the designs, and Marla working with the electronics, and, you know, between the two of us, you know, building it and putting it together. And then Easter Seal, and then over to university and all that work. No, to see it go into the good hands of where it should have gone. Excuse me. No, it's not a sad thing at all. It actually made us feel pretty good to know that we could do that and just let it go on and do what it has to do on its own. You know, it's been so many years since I talked to Dr.
McFarland.
Yeah, McFarland, was it? Yeah. Nowadays, I don't even know if the bloody thing's working.
Yeah.
You know, how many years has this been now? That's been 10 years too. More.
It's been more than 10 years, Brian.
Yeah, it's close to 14
well,
years.
Actually, it was given to him in 80.
Was it 80?
Yeah.
Oh, it's only been 9 years. Seems like it's been longer.
All right. What do you remember of December 22nd, 1976? The actual transformation. When you stood in the doorway,
Mm-hmm.
what happened, and what was the significance of it?
Well, I remember that there was that shift between two worlds. You know, the old thing of being able to just close your eyes and, you know, visually pick yourself up and put yourself elsewhere. And, you know, doing this in little bits and pieces, that was very, very interesting. Because it was just like it. It just felt like two totally worlds, two personalities, and everything to do with it was just all changing. Gee, I got a cough here, unfortunately.
All right. Cough.
Cough. Clear the old throat. That always sounds good on tape.
Sorry.
Yeah, I remember, you know, standing in the doorway and that feeling of drifting between the two worlds, coming back, going, coming back, going. You know, knowing that we're, you know, to let go of us, we're to let go of this like too soon. It's like you can't help but feel like you were going to fall. I mean, like, and you're never going to get up. It's like the endless falling. It mostly came back to the, you know, to the training, you know, to the things that I was taught and to the things that I remembered, and the, you know, the guidance through all this. to be able to do this. There are tremendously weird feelings involved in doing something like that.
Yeah.
To know that Voltaire was here and that part of his mind and his being and spirit could be somehow transformed into me is like, wow. I mean, that in itself is a mind-boggling experience, because at the other end, you're, me, Brian, you're starting to communicate with a whole different world of people, experiencing what they're experiencing, what they walk, where they walk, what they do, trying to catch up with all that.
Were you experiencing their world?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there was times when I used to drift back and forth between the two a little bit, remember?
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember that, but it's like I could be here and be there too, and then come back between the two. And sometimes you get stuck between the two a little bit.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, because then you can see both sides almost simultaneously. And it's usually the people. I mean, around whatever went on with this, how it would impact them. If everything that was going on, you'd have to admit. I mean, here comes a guy walking, basically onto the earth, taking a whole new step, and the only thing he's got are the anchors that are around him, the people that are there. You need all that to be able to get the rest of it put together, right?
Yeah.
So what did we do? We got through all that, lost a little bit for a couple of days trying to figure out which is day, which is night.
Yeah.
Why are the bugs being hit by the cars driving down the highway? Remember that?
Yeah.
All kinds of weird things. Kind of like an infant. But, it didn't take much. I mean, we're only talking, a couple weeks, and we're back to America, and total confusion, total chaos, totally being ripped off by everybody,
Yeah.
ex-wife, people, right? It's like, good grief. I mean, to take what there was and let it develop, it's almost like planting a seed that's going to grow the ear of corn. Eventually, you get the corn, but there's some maturing in between. If every time you go to grow, if all that happens is someone dumps rat poison on top of your food,
Yeah.
it ain't going to get too far. I don't know. It was a very unique experience, knowing that these two worlds could meet through a mental and physical plane that unite the two. And be able to do that, to be able to step out in both worlds and know what was going on.
Yeah.
To some degree. Everything that happened here was supposedly geared to happen in the way it happened. I gotta guess that some of the holes that we fell into, people along the way that made it very hard or difficult to get there, that had to be part of the plan.
Yeah.
You need that. I guess I needed it. You have to have a little bit of, down to be able to get back up, because what came out of that was it wasn't much after that. The Nora really started to be more real. It was something we had to do.
Yeah, we gave up on everybody else.
Yeah. Well, that didn't make much sense. I mean, you wake up one day, you have a wife. You wake up the next day, the wife's out partying with every guy in town while you're off getting transformed. That's kind of interesting, I mean, still to this day, I wonder how many times Jerry Vin and her had got together prior to this, But, you just don't know.
It's weird.
Yeah, it is weird, because, they took all these things as being very moral, and especially in male-female relationships, there's a tremendous moral viewpoint to all this. Linyana,
Yeah.
I guess this was so bad that the impact, she absorbed all that. It's like somebody who can reach out and touch somebody and feel their pain and absorb the pain, take it away. This poor girl absorbed all that pain. She tried to take it away. She took too much on herself and died doing it. It just blew her mind away. She couldn't handle the psychological implications of where this would go. I guess they knew. And of course, that was kind of a good thing for me too, because it, what can you say? It opened the door to know that, well, you may be Voltaire, but that don't mean you can't be pooped on. That he's just as vulnerable as Brian is.
Even more.
Yeah, even more. And Brian's on the other world being fairly protected. I don't imagine that, we never really got into all that, but there's nothing to it. I mean, it's a very simple, blasé type atmosphere. I can still remember some of the weird things, like the food, the place you sleep, like on a bed of air. Doesn't even have a bed. You're just sleeping on some kind of zero gravity, nothing world, but yet there's something there. You can feel form, but you can't see it. And yet it supports you in what appears to be an airless void. You know, weird things, strange and unusual things, you know. But I felt safe, you know.
Yeah.
I didn't have to worry about Brian on that end being shafted. All I had to worry about was Voltaire on this end, and how do we get Voltaire through all this, you know? How do we get something to start that would do something? I guess if we could get out on the Nor maybe immediately, it might have worked out, but, you know, didn't we try to do that, though?
Yeah, we
Pretty
tried
much in the
over and
beginning?
over.
Yeah, sure seems strange. Well, so what do we have? We have a mini Nor, which is a minor version of an entire system that would deal with, you know, the physical and mental and awareness, emotions. My God, you're talking about everything that deals with the body itself. Learning how to control it, how to use it, how to restore things that aren't right. At least, you know, as far as this world would go. You know, if you have a hearing problem, or you have a speech problem, or you have a physical limitation with your body or something, you know, on how to use all these different things that they would put into this for light and sound and, you know, it's hard to believe. You know? It's like we just touched the tip of the iceberg, and there was so much more to go with that. An
So
entire language, a cybernetic language based on light and sound.
You think
Or psycho-cybernetic language, I guess it was.
if our society was going to pick up on anything, that's what we should pick up on?
Well, that wouldn't hurt. I mean, there was some good stuff and all that. If you learn to communicate with yourself more, your whole being, and then you can learn to communicate with other beings on a whole level. I got it.